Hello, I'm Emily Rhodes, and today I'm going to be talking to you about this book, Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. It's it's a really fascinating book. It's very thin, as you can see, um, and I think you could describe it by saying that a woman in her 40s wanders around an unnamed Italian city and not much happens. And she's quite alone. Um, However, it is, of course, far more fascinating and nuanced than this. So, we're going to get into a couple of the ideas in the book. I want to talk particularly about shadows, which I found very fascinating. But before we come on to that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the kind of surroundings of the book, I suppose. So, I said it's by Jhumpa Lahiri. This book is actually written originally in Italian by Jhumpa Lahiri, and then she translated it into English. Um, Lahiri is a British American writer, and her parents were from Bengal in India. I think I've got that all right. She's written other beautiful collections of short stories and novels. I particularly loved Unaccustomed Earth, which we discussed in the book club a few years ago, and also The Interpreter of Maladies. These she wrote in English, and they're very much about the kind of Indian diaspora, I suppose, living in, I think, mostly in North America. And this feeling, which I think is not unusual in diasporic writing, of being kind of in between. So, not quite of the subcontinent, not quite of the American continent, not quite of Europe. Where are they? Sort of caught somewhere and nowhere, and there's that push pull of home and where is home and what things you inherit from your parents, things you want to move on from. Um, so they make for very beautiful, complex, nicely observed books. Lahiri then moved to Italy and fell in love with Italy and the Italian language, and she now lives in Rome and started reading and writing in Italian, which is a sort of huge, huge change. Um, I actually should say I just today had an Italian lesson. I'm trying to learn Italian and I'm doing really, really badly at it. But I'm keeping on trying. Anyway, I'm definitely nowhere close to writing whereabouts or um, whatever it's called. Dove mi. Oh man, why can't I remember this? Dove mi trovo, where I find myself. Um, in Italian. Anyway, she then started writing in Italian. Her previous Italian books, Lahiri got somebody else to translate into English for her. But this one, she not only wrote it in Italian, she then translated it into English herself. And on our walks this month, we talked a bit about this book as a work of writing and of translation, and we wondered what qualities that maybe gave to the writing. Generally speaking, most people really, really loved this book, which in some ways is a little surprising because, I mean, it really is not that much happens in it. And it's quite niche, I suppose, quite esoteric. And the fact that so many of our walkers really connected with it was really interesting to me. And everybody, even the people who didn't particularly like it, there were a few who just found it a bit too abstract, a bit too, you know, not enough happened in it for them. Everybody agreed that the writing was incredibly beautiful and that there were all these kind of lines that you just wanted to appreciate on their own and pull out. And I do wonder if perhaps the fact that not only has she written the book, but then went back and translated it, so much thought has gone into every single word. I wonder if that's what makes it particularly beautiful, I suppose, particularly resonant. So, the first thing we did on our walk was, rather than talking about this unnamed woman who I think it's fair to say she's a little bit of a frustrating protagonist. We never know her name, and she's quite passive. She sort of drifts around observing everyone, and I suppose it really pulls up this question of solitude. She says at some point, "Solitude, it's my trade." She's very much alone in the city. She's not a mother. She's quite estranged from her own mother. Her father, we learn, had died. We don't know anything about her wider family, I don't think. And we sort of see her at work as an academic, which again, I suppose, is quite a solitary pursuit. But I wouldn't say she is entirely alone. So we actually began in our discussion by pulling out all the other characters in the book and, just thinking about who does she observe, who does she see, who does she come into contact with, who does she connect with, and what is the nature of these connections? Are they meaningful? Are they quite fleeting? Are they positive? Are they negative? And my sort of aim in getting everyone to do this was partly to kind of get the feeling of the book back in our heads, partly for the brilliant challenge of trying to describe all these characters, none of whom have got any names. So it was quite funny. We'd end up saying things like, the friend whose husband came and ate all the cakes, or we also called him like the biro dad, and it's funny actually, because I suppose it does make you think about how you would describe people to others. But my main point was that really she's not alone. There are all these other people in her life, in her orbit, and I suppose we can reflect on that more generally if we think about our place in the world, our place in the city. Maybe we do feel quite alone at times, but in fact there are so many connections, whether it's with the guy who makes the delicious sandwiches for her, or the family she observes through the years in the trattoria, or the teenage girl who she's looking out for. We notice that she often sees herself, or her sort of past self, in these other characters, and reflected on that a bit. Certainly something, surely, that's like quite a human instinct, right? You see someone else maybe a bit younger than you, and you remember yourself being that age, and think about how you would have been, and how they remind you of yourself then, and maybe there's a bit of a poignancy there. What am I talking about? Oh, yeah. So she's alone. She's alone, but she's not alone. And the thing that has kind of stuck with me from our discussion about that I wanted to explore a bit today, is this idea of shadows. And I'm going to read a little bit out. It's a very short bit. So this bit is called In the Shade. So yeah, I should also say this book is made up of all these very, very short vignettes. Anything between sort of 2 and, 10 pages each, which actually made many of us think back to one of our previous books, Mrs. Bridge, which I think is quite a nice comparison. Again, if we're thinking about isolation or aloneness versus connection. This vignette is called In the Shade, and it's about her trip to the beach, and she says, "The sun was so strong I thought I might die." And we can definitely relate to that feeling on an Italian beach. And she's looking around for some shade, and she ends up dozing off in the shadow of another woman who's asleep. And then, okay, so then I'm going to read it out. When I woke up, the lounge chair was empty, the woman was gone. But the grey light that pervaded the sky after sunset made me melancholy. That diffuse shade, exclusive to no one, defeated me. It provided no relief. Come to think of it, there's always some savage element at the beach, either to tolerate or to overcome, an element we crave and cower from at the same time. I've always felt in someone's shadow, even though I don't have to compare myself to brothers who are smarter or to sisters who are prettier. There's no escape from the shadows that mount inexorably in this darkening season, nor can we escape the shadows our families cast. That said, there are times I miss the pleasant shade a companion might provide. So I think we can see there, I suppose, what I meant by this idea that, you know, there are some really beautiful sections here. The language is so, I suppose, beautiful and evocative and shadowy, I think. Okay, so if we unpick this for a moment. So we've got this scene of the woman's shadow who she takes shelter in. She finds no relief in the sort of general shadow of the time of year, that general shade. And then she talks about always feeling in someone's shadow. What does she mean by this? You know, there's no escape from the shadows that mount in this darkening season. So she's just, at the beginning of the chapter, she says they've just put the clocks back. So, you know, it's getting, the time of year is changing, it's darkening, it's, you know, winter is coming. But the shadow, so maybe there's sort of shadows there in terms of how we feel, the mood. It's not an easy time of year. But how hard it is, impossible in fact, certainly for this protagonist to escape the shadows our families cast. And we really see the shadow in particular that her father casts over everything. And I think that's such a kind of useful thing to think about whenever going into therapy or anything like that. You know, our life has got just these shadows flung over our lives from our families in the past. And how, you know, we tend to think of that as being problematic. You know, we don't like being in someone's shadow. We don't like having a shadow overhanging things. But then she flips it and thinks about the pleasant shade that a companion might provide. And suddenly shadows go from being quite menacing, quite threatening, quite unhelpful, something you might want to escape from, into something where you would like to shelter. And I thought that was a really beautiful thought and such a great way of putting it. And I suppose thinking so much about shadows, it made me think that many of the characters in the books and the scenes have this slightly shadowy feel. And even like right at the start, this is in the second chapter, she bumps into this man who kind of recurs a few times. And they're crossing a bridge. They meet in the middle of the bridge. And she says, we stop in the middle and look at the wall that flanks the river and the shadows of pedestrians cast on its surface. They look like skittish ghosts advancing in a row, obedient souls passing from one realm to another. And there is something kind of ghosty or shade-like about the characters in the book. And very occasionally there's a sudden burst of vivid colour. A teenage girl she meets with has a bright drink. I think it's pomegranate juice that she describes as the colour of blood. There's a brilliant scene with a dead mouse where she describes it makes her think of a fig, you know, it's sort of like this sort of horrible grey mouse and there's a bright red inside like a fig. So it feels very shadowy, quite dreamlike. It made me think almost of Dante's Inferno or something, these sort of layers, you know, moving from one realm into another, the underworld, these ghosts. And also, of course, there is this idea, I think, if we're thinking about the shadows our families cast and, you know, psychoanalysis, we should definitely think about Jung and the shadow self, by which he meant this side of yourself that you sort of repress and can't express because, you know, for whatever reason, it's the sort of repressed self, your shadow self. Maybe you're ashamed of it, or it's sort of not allowed by society, and how important it is for us all to be able to inhabit that shadow self. And it definitely feels as though this protagonist does not inhabit her shadow self. She can't. And occasionally she has these strange kind of ruptures when she's at a dinner party and sort of really yells at another guest, and then she feels very ashamed afterwards. The moment with a man he lets his kid draw with a biro on her sofa. You know, it's a very shadowy book, I suppose. I don't feel I've fully got a handle on it. Not a huge amount does happen, but there is some feeling of progress, I think. There's a moment when she suddenly laughs, which is quite incredible, and it's a little bit like these bursts of colour. There's this burst of emotion. But it's a very beautiful book, and it's shadowy and nebulous, and it's one that maybe it slightly slips through your fingers as you're reading it, just like smoke, I suppose. But there are definitely bits that you catch and you kind of come back to. And for me, I think that bit that I read out about the different types of shadow is something that is really going to be with me now. And I'm really grateful to Jhumpa Lahiri for writing that and for passing that on. So yeah, not all shadows are bad. Yes, I would love to know your thoughts on this book. I hope you enjoyed it. And this is the May pick for Emily's Walking Book Club. We're back in June with, I think I got it right here. Yes, I do. Muriel Spark, Loitering with Intent. Thank you so much.